Hello friends, I'm Christopher and today I'm going to tell you how I plant potatoes using a no-dig method. Well, today is my average last frost date, April 30th. And for me, that means it's time to plant potatoes. Now, potatoes can be planted up to 3 weeks before your average last frost date, but this season I was too lazy to start them myself, so I had to wait for my local greenhouse to get their seed potatoes in, and that just happened this week. So here we are planting on the average last frost date, which is just fine. A couple things about potatoes. Be sure you can either put the entire potato in the ground or you can cut them in half. Either way, make sure you have enough eyes that have chitted facing upward to get a good start. Otherwise, if you plant half of a potato that doesn't really have any eyes on it, it's not going to produce much. There's nothing wrong with putting the whole potato in the ground. I just think this gets a little higher yield. We can expect 5 to 10 potatoes per seed potato this way. Potatoes tend to like soil that is cool and slightly acidic, although my soil is relatively neutral and they do just fine. Keep your soil temperatures, you can't control your soil temperature really, but they prefer to make tubers when the soil temperature is in the 60s Fahrenheit. When it gets above the mid 70s into the 80s, they have trouble putting out extra tubers. They'll still grow, but it'll be stinted. So really, up in our area, the best time to plant potatoes for continuous harvest is on your average last frost date, or 3 weeks before with no cover, or even sooner if you've got a hoop house and a low tunnel, all those kind of things that can really help extend your season of potatoes. You can, of course, extend your harvesting season throughout the year by planting certain types of potatoes. This one is an early harvesting potato, so probably in 90 days, within 80-90 days, we'll be harvesting this. And then there's another variety that I'll be planting probably in 2 weeks, which will come to maturity in about 130 days. So we can have potatoes kind of continually harvested throughout the summer and early fall instead of just one great big lump. Hopefully that way we will run into fewer storage issues and such. But on to the point of today's video, how am I planting using a no-dig method? Well, here we go. To begin, we have to prepare this bed. Now this is a raised bed that I built last year, and it is exactly as I left it in the fall. I'm going to begin by just making the surface even with my tines and loosening up the topsoil. What does this do? Well, it just makes the soil a little bit more loose so that I can eventually push the potatoes in gently. Here's how some of my potatoes look. This one you can see that I had cut in half and let it dry out for a day or two. And you can see I've got lots of eyes here on the top. They are ready to be planted like this, and they will grow straight up. And this particular potato I'm going to have to plant whole because really I've only got eyes here on one side and not enough on the rest of the potato where I feel comfortable cutting it in half and hoping that maybe this one grows or this one that doesn't have anything coming, does something. I'll just, do this. I'm placing each of these seed potatoes about 10 inches apart on center, and that's usually enough to give them enough room to grow. Now, just giving them a gentle push in the ground to keep them where they need to be. That's why we took our hoe and we roughed up the soil. Oftentimes people have problems overcrowding their potatoes. I definitely do. I've tried to do these in barrels to mixed success. So this year I'm just going back to the tried and true method of doing it in ground. Potatoes are heavy feeders, so I'm going to make sure to give these enough nutrients so that they can have a successful time growing. First off, I've got some dried worm castings. I ended up being lucky. This 5-pound bucket here was only $5. Our local penal institution, they've got a vermicomposting system, so you could buy it pretty inexpensively. I'm going to lightly powder this on top, and then I'm going to cover it with just a little bit of a mixture I've got here for drainage. This is peat moss, compost, and perlite. It's worked well for me in the past, so that's what I'm going to do now. That compost again will feed it, kind of like the worm castings will. We want to make sure to keep the potatoes covered as they grow, because if the skin's exposed to the sun, they'll start to turn green, and if you eat a green potato, you'll feel sick. So we're going to keep these covered with leaf mulch. Using leaves as a source of mulch is really practical for me, because I never bag any of my yard refuse. I've got maple trees and oak trees and walnut trees and hickory trees, and those leaves just fall and I add them to my compost. And then when the time is right, I take what I need and I leave the rest to decompose. 3 weeks ago, I blew all the leaves that I let sit during the fall, and I picked them up and I put them into my compost. I've got 3 different stages. The way that I compost, I use a cold composting method. I really rarely ever turn it, and in a couple years it becomes good compost. In the meantime, you're welcome to take the stuff on top and use it. So 3 weeks ago, both this stage and this stage were heaping up to about here. So it's gone down about 2 feet at the lowest point. I'm going to be taking from this particular stage today, because this one I dedicate mostly to weeds, whereas these 2 I happen to dedicate to just good biomatter that won't go to seed and then spread more weeds. Anyways, that's more than you needed to know. I really wish you could smell this. It smells like autumn and springtime all at the same time. As this naturally breaks down, you get that sense of a crisp autumn day, probably because it's a crisp spring day. It's maybe 45 degrees Fahrenheit here. But that's one of the magical things about gardening, you know? I think we can have a gardening moment here. One of the things that I like are the smells of the garden, the smell of the earth. And this is just one of those moments that is hard to capture, you know? There's a great saying, Leonard Nimoy, the actor who played Spock from Star Trek, among many other things, his very last tweet, he was a poet, and he also tweeted, his very last tweet, and I'll paraphrase, was, "Life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had, but never maintained, except in memory." And that's something that I keep in mind when I'm gardening. So this is a memory that I have, and maybe you have a similar one. Now all that's left to do is wait. There's no need for me to water this in. As you can see, it's plenty moist. It was raining earlier today, and we've got some rain in the forecast later tonight and tomorrow. And in 3 weeks or so, we should start seeing nice green shoots from potatoes popping up. And then in time, as this mulch continues to decompose and break down, I'll add some more to the top of it. And if I run out of leaves, I'll add some soil. But leaves are free, and use what you've got, right? Thanks a lot for tuning in. How do you think I did? Have you used a method similar to this? How have your results been? And if you think I did anything wrong, leave a respectful comment below. Gardening is about learning and, you know, taking chances. Sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you strike gold. So I think we've all been there. Anyways, I think I'm going to strike gold with this year. Fingers crossed. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you'll subscribe, watch some other stuff, and until next time, happy gardening. Bye.